I'm Ravi Ramamurthy, Director of the Center for Emerging Markets. Welcome to the fourth in our series on China. And this one focused on China's 14th five-year plan, which, as you may know, came out officially last month. Our speaker is again Michael Enright. If you've come to the series before, you've heard him on 3 other topics. He is the Pierre Choueiri Family Professor of Global Business at the Damore McKim School of Business and a fellow of the Center for Emerging Markets. Michael will talk for about 40 minutes, if I understand the plan, which is similar to what we've done before, and then we'll have time for Q&A. And as Magda said, please post your any comments or questions you have into the chat, and we will funnel those to Michael towards the end of the session. So thank you again for joining us, and over to you, Michael.
Okay, thank you, Ravi. Okay, sharing my screen. And once again, I'd like to thank all of you who have come, and also the Center for Emerging Markets at Northeastern for hosting and sponsoring this series. I just want to flag that our next session will be May 12th, and this will be on the challenge for Chinese companies going public in the US, and that will be led by our colleague David Sherman, who's also on the line this evening. So I very much look forward to that and hope you can all join us for that one as well. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about China's 14th five-year plan and more, because there's always more when it comes to China. Again, as Ravi indicated, that's me. I joined the Northeastern faculty July of last year. Before that, I was based in Hong Kong and Asia for 24 years. I've done a huge amount of work in China, both for foreign companies and actually a number of projects for local governments in China and also for foreign governments looking at China. A number of my publications, you can just Google them and find them if you wish. Okay, first, what are China's five-year plans? They're generally framed as the five-year plans for economic and social development. And they provide the overall strategic direction for the nation's development. They're also the touchstone for decisions by local ministry and agency officials. And this is actually quite important because if you're dealing with officials in China, in general, they're not allowed to make decisions that don't correspond or coincide with the governing documents, of which the five-year plan is a major one. The five-year plan also provides a signal for companies, banks, and individuals as to what industries, technologies, approaches will be supported by the Chinese Communist Party, that's CCP, and the Chinese government. It also provides vision, guidance, and a rallying point for the public as a whole as to where the country is going. And embedded in most of the plans are goals and milestones with which to measure progress along the way. Now, there's a usual timing and responsibility here. Usually a five-year plan, and as Ravi indicated, the latest one was just released in early March of this year. The five-year plans usually are the result of 2 years of detailed planning orchestrated by NDRC, the National Development and Reform Commission. And they're foreshadowed by the communiques of the 5th plenum of the Chinese Communist Party Congress. So in October of last year, some of the basic outline of the 14th five-year program was made public. And then when it's formally adopted by the National People's Congress, it's issued by State Council and becomes issued. So that's just sort of timing and responsibility. And I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Because Xi Jinping has actually changed the game a bit when it comes to the five-year plans. So the latest one was the 14th five-year plan, as we know. The first five-year plan was promulgated in 1953. There was actually a gap between 63 and 65 where there was no current five-year plan. And in my view, the 14th five-year plan may be the most important one since the 7th, which was the one that really put the plans in place for China's economic reform program. The reform program had actually started several years earlier, 79 and 80, but the 7th plan was the one that really elaborated where China looked to go through the economic reform process. And in my view, the 14th five-year plan represents the start of a new era for China in terms of economic, social, political, and geopolitical development. Now, we have to remember that the national five-year plan is only one of many, 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 many five-year plans. So we have the national five-year plan, and then we also have plans that will roll out over the next year or so at the provincial level, the municipal level, and even districts within municipalities. In addition, there will be a number of thematic plans which may or may not correspond precisely in time to the five-year plan on civilian military development, environment, rural development, science and technology, transportation, a number of things. And then there are also a series of sectoral plans that come out, some of which correspond with the same five-year plan period, and some are a little bit off of that. Aerospace, agriculture, autos, cultural industries, energy, IT, tourism, etc. And again, there are a whole bunch of them. So in essence, the national five-year plan sets in motion a complete cascading of plans that will be issued in the next several months that really map out in quite a bit of detail where China is going, or at least where it aims to go over the next five-year period. There's also a timing, as I mentioned, involved. And one of the things that's very interesting is that the Chinese Communist Party leadership timeline, the Chinese government timeline, and the five-year program timelines actually differ. So for example, the 12th five-year plan got going in 2011, first quarter, ran through 2015. Then we had the 13th one, which is just basically concluded. We have the 14th one, which is starting now, basically, etc. But the party, the Chinese Communist Party, tends to change its personnel over at a different time. The fourth quarter, in this case of 2012, was when Xi Jinping took office as Secretary General of the Chinese Communist Party, and then he didn't take his position as president, head of state of the Chinese government, until the first quarter of 2013. And one of the things that he did when he came into office was that if we look at his timeline, his first few years in office were implementing a five-year plan that was already in place. And if he had let the normal course of affairs run, he would have started implementing a 13th five-year plan, which had actually been put together by people put in office the same time that he was, i.e., not necessarily his people. So what Xi did is he created a number of initiatives that actually were promulgated off cycle. So the Belt and Road Initiative is 2013, and the Made in China 2025 program is 2015. And also for the 13th five-year plan, he actually pulled the planning process out of National Development and Reform Commission and actually put it into a set of small leading groups that he himself personally chaired. And the reason for that was that by the time the 13th five-year program was then issued, it was his plan put together by his people. rather than him having to spend his entire first term and maybe a significant chunk of his second term putting together plans which may have been not his, or at least not his in terms of primary input. Now, when he took his second term, he was able to put his people in place in the party and in the government. So for the 14th five-year plan, actually, that process was pulled back into being orchestrated by National Development and Reform Commission, and the cycle more or less returned to what it was previously. Now, one of the things, of course, people are wondering is whether President and Secretary General Xi will take a third term. Term limits for the state offices, president and vice president, have been formally eliminated. And the odds are in many quarters that Xi will opt for another term. That will become important in a few minutes. Okay, so I just want to give you the sense of the timing and the process. This is a 2-year, very detailed process. We also have to think of another timeline. And this other timeline involves China's centennial goals. There are 2 key centennials, one this year, one in 2049. The one this year is the centennial of the founding of the Chinese Communist Party. And one of the goals for 2021 is to build a moderately prosperous society in all respects. And this is taken to mean eliminating or coming as close as possible to eliminating absolute poverty, providing an average middle income by international standards with equivalent improvement in overall living standards and China's standing in the international community. By 2049, the centennial of the founding of the People's Republic of China, or the New China, as it's sometimes called, one of the goals is to build a modern socialist country that is prosperous, strong, and culturally advanced and harmonious. And this is taken to mean reaching the frontier in terms of science and technology, being a world leader, achieving a moderately advanced income level by international standards. And if you look now, at the lower end of the OECD, we have per capita incomes of the upper 20s heading to 30,000 US. China today is about 11,000, 12,000 US. And it's to be basically strong and influential internationally, with China prosperous at home and well respected and influential globally. And 2035, which I'll come back to in a few minutes, conveniently enough, is the midpoint between 2021 and 2049. So let's keep these dates in our heads. It's only 3 dates. It's not that hard. Okay. What I'm going to put forth now are some very wordy slides, but there is not yet an official complete translation of the 5-year plan in English available. So I've done sort of my own version, at least of the table of contents. And this slide and the next few are just designed to show you how comprehensive this single document is. So after a sort of preamble, it gets into what the strategy is. Adhere to innovation-driven development. China is no longer satisfied with development based on labor costs or low-level factors of production. It wants its economy and its society driven by innovation, just like the US or Switzerland or Japan or other advanced countries. It wants to accelerate the development of a modern industrial system, consolidating and strengthening the real economy, read that as manufacturing, where the idea is not just to be a large manufacturer, but a world-class advanced manufacturer. Also developing the service sector to go with it and infrastructure to go with it. A strong domestic market to reduce reliance on international markets, and also to build a a larger, more affluent consumer society, so that Chinese consumers themselves are able to purchase, have the incomes, are able to drive economic growth through domestic demand. Then there are a series of detailed articles about specific technologies, about building up digital China. And this is both hardware and software. It's semiconductors, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, etc. It's also to stimulate the socialist market economy. Now, the socialist market economy is not the market economy. It's an economy where the market is designed to improve efficiency by competition, but where the overall direction is still tightly controlled at the central level. So it's market within plan, as it were, which is sometimes confusing, but again, it actually works for them. Agricultural revitalization, new urbanization, which is what I talked about last time, creating city clusters, modernizing cities to improve their economic, environmental, ecological footprint, optimizing regional layouts within China, creating regional markets, regional divisions of labor, but also regional specializations. For example, the Greater Bay Area of South China has been told you will become China's Silicon Valley. The Yangtze River Delta around Shanghai will become the major projecting force for Shanghai as a global city, as influential as New York or London or Paris. The advanced socialist culture to enhance the country's cultural soft power. So it's not just enhancing culture for the sake of advancing Chinese culture and for the betterment of the people. It's to advance culture as a mechanism to project soft power, as media and other influences from the US have done historically. It's promoting green development, not only to improve the environment, but it's also to reduce imports of energy, where China has fairly abundant, pretty dirty coal, but otherwise is very short in terms of key energy inputs. Implementing an opening to the outside world and a new situation of win-win competition. I'll come back to this a little later. In one of our earlier sessions, I defined China's selective internationalization, basically opening up to get finance in, technological inputs in, but closing off sectors that it views as strategic and sectors that it views that China doesn't necessarily need the input from foreign companies. Promoting all around development of people and quality of life and quality of people too, through education, but also healthcare, et cetera. Enhance livelihood issues, again, what you would expect there, socially conscious. Development and security to build a higher level of safe China. Some translations of this say peaceful China, but actually my view is the correct translation is safe China. It's make the world safe for China and Chinese people and the Chinese Communist Party. Part of that is speeding up national defense modernization. Then there's work on the socialist democracy, which basically means enhancing the leadership role of the Chinese Communist Party. Adhere to one country, two systems. That's the rubric within which Macau and Hong Kong have been brought back into the fold, and the rubric with which the PRC plans to pull Taiwan back into the fold, and then basically improve our planning process. So this is, 19 articles, 65 chapters. The previous one was 80 chapters, so this one's a little bit shorter, but it is really detailed, right? And it focuses on a number of key issues, some of which are familiar and repetitive of the past, and some of which are new. I'll pick out just a few of what I think the highlights are. And some of these are idiosyncratic, my version of the highlights versus what you might see in other places. My view is that this 5-year plan and the reports, the working reports that were issued at the 2 sessions that the Chinese Communist Party had in March, and the government had, basically, in my view, it closes the chapter on the basics of economic and social development. The goal to eradicate or mostly eradicate extreme poverty, those are mostly met. And during that period, since the opening of the reform process, late 79, early 1980, until 2020, basically, China was dealing with the rest of the world, at least in part, in a way where it was perhaps not able to hold its own internationally. But this 5-year plan closes that chapter and says, we've been there, we've done that. We now are moving forward with a chapter, with a new chapter in our history, focused on technological, industrial, cultural, and military, not development, but leadership. Leadership in key industries and technologies that were already targeted in the 2015 Made in China 2025 program, or the 2020 China Standards 2035 initiatives, re-emphasizing the importance of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is both economic and geopolitical in terms of projecting China's influence, the cultural rejuvenation, not on its own merits per se, but to project Chinese soft power. Another departure of this particular plan is that this particular plan includes not just 5-year goals, but 2035 long-term goals. It basically makes the plan much longer range than the earlier 5-year plans. And it is also, in my view, an indication that Xi Jinping wishes to personally direct China's development way beyond the time when he eventually leaves office, whenever that is. Because what he's really doing is setting the benchmarks till 2035, not until 2025. The focus on technology is distinctive. It was there in the 13th 5-year program. It is doubled down in this one, with targets for R&D expenditure, innovation performance, and the digital economy, specific plans for multiple high-tech industries, a major focus on greater self-sufficiency in key technologies, leading to a China leadership role in these technologies, and also leadership in international technology standard setting. And if you read the speeches that go around it and have an idea of some of the backroom back and forth, it's also a plan, or at least an outline, that involves controlling key technology supply chains. In other words, being in a situation where the US could no longer impose sanctions on technology exports that would harm China, and rather China would have the power not only to be self-sufficient, so it didn't have to fear from the international community, but could also, to the extent possible, control international supply chains and leverage the power that results from that. There is emphasis on the dual circulation economy, as I mentioned before. This is a combined domestic and international economy, where it's enhancing and increasing domestic demand and consumption, in part to reduce reliance on external demand. And that can be because of economic fluctuations as well as trade tensions. But also it's an emphasis on import substitution, particularly of key technology areas, and safeguarding supply chains. And the safest supply chains are the ones that we control. It's continuing to develop key export markets and seeking to influence, dominate international supply chains. And as I said before, selective internationalization. The current 5-year plan indicates a significant opening for international finance and financial services. In other words, we will take your money, and also opening for companies to do R&D in China, bring technology to China, but not necessarily being more open in other areas of the economy. So it's take from the international what we can get and protect ourselves from the international in areas that we think protection is merited. There's also an emphasis on key regions and development. Historically, since the economic opening, the Yangtze River Delta, the Greater Bay Area, which encompasses Hong Kong, Macau, and about a third of Guangdong province, and then the Bohai area, Beijing, Tianjin, and the area of Hebei province immediately surrounding. These are focused on in the 5-year plan to be the leaders in science, technology, and development. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that for many years, starting around 2000, there was about a 10, 15-year period where the development emphasis was much more on central and western China and the northeastern part of China, the poorer parts of China, in order to alleviate poverty and get some level of economic development there to enhance people's livelihoods. But in this 5-year plan, what China is doing, it's going back to selective development on the most advanced areas. The reason being that these are the areas that are most likely to be able to push China forward in science, technology, and all of the industries that go with that. So it's moving back to asymmetric development because it's viewed as in the national interest. As I said before, the view is, at least in part, we have solved many of the basics, so we don't have to worry as much on basic poverty alleviation. We now want to become leaders in science, technology, and advanced manufacturing and service industries. So it's a shift back to the economically strong. And there are a number of sub-plans in this document that do that. There's also a focus on national security, a safe China, modernized military, but also internal security is viewed as an important part of national security. Also improvements in food and natural resource security. That's in part due to agricultural or based on agricultural targets, but it's also resource security through domestic supplies and also supplies that can be brought into China through the Belt and Road Initiative, with hopefully increasingly friendly countries providing safe trade routes and transport routes for resources into China. It's also technological self-reliance because, of course, so much of modern military hardware relies on advanced technology. And then, as I said before, control of key supply chains and trade routes, because how can you be safe and secure if you don't have the ability to safeguard those supply chains and trade routes, whether they're inside your country or outside of your country? I say here modest environmental progress. There are environmental targets, and they're relatively modest. There is no word, Xi Jinping not long ago indicated that China was going to try to become net zero emissions by 2060. There's nothing particular in this plan that gives us a target or gives us a real mechanism to get from here to there. So that may be forthcoming in other plans down the road. International influence through Belt and Road, through the soft powers I mentioned before, improving people's livelihoods. Yes, that is an important part of the plan, and it's something, again, that China has delivered on repeatedly over the last 40 plus years now. One of the things that's very interesting is no specific GDP targets, which have been major features of previous 5-year plans. The target for growth in GDP is to be reasonable depending on the situation. Growth in labor productivity is supposed to be higher than GDP growth. Growth in disposable income is supposed to be in line with GDP growth. And when the 2035 objectives are factored in, and you sort of look at the countries that appear to be targeted as comparators, you wind up projecting that in order to achieve that, 6% growth is probably required for some significant period of time. But that's not a hard and fast number that officials are going to be held to in terms of a target in this 5-year plan. And that is different from previous plans, which again have featured headline GDP growth targets. And that raises the question of why are there no GDP targets? And one answer is that there's just too much uncertainty. There's uncertainty amidst the COVID crisis, with the trade tensions. We're not sure where the global economy is going. We're not sure where China's international trade relations are going, whether there may be economic costs to some of the diplomatic back and forth, to put it politely, that's been going on recently. And so there is a view that says, well, it's just too risky to put down specific targets that may become political commitments that are difficult to meet and therefore, potentially a source of discontent. I accept that, and I believe that's certainly part of it. But I also think, quite frankly, that headline GDP growth is not the focal point anymore. Because quite frankly, I've been looking at China's economy for 25 years. If I wanted to lay out a plan to maximize China's economic growth, it actually would not be this plan. This plan is sort of jumping ahead. It's in some sectors flying before you can drive, when maybe you should be thinking about walking, running, bicycling, driving before you take to space. So my view is that also, along with the uncertainty, it's just that GDP growth is not the focal point anymore. That's not the goal. The goal is for a powerful, safe China with improved standards of living, yes, but GDP headline growth just isn't the target anymore. In part because China has solved the basic needs problem. So now it's moving on to other objectives. It's moving to a chapter in its history where China is not poor, but increasingly affluent, where China is not a rule taker internationally, but increasingly a rule maker. A world in which China is not weak militarily, but strong militarily. A world in which China is no longer biding its time, being quiet while building up its power, but a world in which China more aggressively asserts its interests. It's a new chapter. New chapter requires different goals, requires an evolution at the very least of the strategy. The 14th five-year plan, in my view, is not about maximizing economic development from 2021 to 2025. It's about maximizing China's and the Chinese Communist Party's freedom of action and influence, and putting it on a path to achieve a position of world leadership. Now, I say leadership, I don't say dominance, because in my view, China wants to be, and the statements are that China wants to be at the cutting edge globally by 2049. So that's a leadership position, not necessarily a dominance position. But this is not a plan, in my view, that's primarily about development. It's about power. And I don't view that term pejoratively. I view that term as the power to have the freedom of action that China and its leaders want. So how does the rest of the world, or how should the rest of the world think about this five-year plan? In my view, sorry for the alliteration, but it comes down to 5 Ps that you really need to understand if you're going to deal with this five-year plan. You have to understand the party, the plan, the policies, the people, and the power. So what do I mean by that? The party. As I indicated in our first session back in January, The Communist Party of China is the driving force and decision maker for China. And this quote, which I'll repeat, leadership of the Communist Party of China is the most essential attribute of socialism with Chinese characteristics and the greatest strength of the system. The party exercises overall leadership over all areas of endeavor in every part of the country, right? So it's not ambiguous. And in fact, the overarching theme of Xi Jinping's regime, his administration, has been reassertion of centralized Chinese Communist Party leadership and control. The plans. The 5-year plan represents the party's strategy for economic and social development. It also, this one maps out the priorities of the party for at least through 2035, including the industries, technologies, initiatives that the party and the government will support. And this opens the floodgates. The banks are more likely to lend to companies in favored sectors. IPOs are more likely to be approved for companies in the favored sectors. People investing in those sectors know there will be R&D support, financial support, infrastructure support. It is a signal for the entire economy that this is where you should focus your efforts. It's also a tool to manage a large country with centralized decision-making, but decentralized implementation, and a way to direct market forces to support the favored industries, technologies, initiatives, right? By signaling all of the market actors what markets they should be playing in. The policies. The combination of 5-year plans that will come out provide a roadmap for China's development. And while officials must make decisions consistent with these plans, the details of how to do so, the implementation guidelines, often are not specified. And this provides opportunities and risks for officials all throughout China because their performance is going to be judged on results consistent with the 5-year plans, but they don't have the detailed, step-by-step, how they should make decisions on a day-to-day basis. And that opens the door for others, potentially companies or others, to suggest projects that support the priorities, and that can be the subject of detailed policies. So there's still opportunity to shape the policies, even though the detailed plan has been set. The people, and the people are the people of the party. And here, to dramatically oversimplify, and I'll apologize to those who know better, but if you think about these sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 levels, the top 5 may have government posts, but they get their power from their party posts. The top 3 levels, the Politburo Standing Committee and the Secretary General, those are the key decision makers. But to go outside the box, outside the plan, it's really only the top 2 levels that generally can do that. Levels 4 and 5, Central Committees, National Party Congress, those people are primarily implementers, with or without specific direction as to how to do it. And to give you an idea, sorry for the lack of parentheses here, but most of the ministers are at this 4th or 5th level. Most of the ministers in China are not in the Politburo. That means if you go to the US, if you go to the UK, the ministers are the people along with the prime minister or the president making policy. That's not the case in China. A minister may be a 4th or even 5th level person. The power to grant or deny access to markets, the power to leverage a large nation's resources to reshape the economy, the power of self-sufficiency, the power of unity of purpose and focus. That's the power that we see being wielded in this 5-year plan document. And as I've said in earlier discussions, dealing with China is always about relative power. And now China's leaders believe they are well on the way of having the upper hand, which again is reflective in the diplomatic communications over the last several months. So how can foreign companies benefit from this 5-year program and beyond, or can they? Well, go back to those 5 Ps. The party's priorities are clear. Can you do good business while contributing to those priorities? The plan is now clear. Is the company in sectors that will be supported by China? Can the company take advantage of that support? Is the company in sectors that foreign investment will be encouraged, permitted, restricted, prohibited? The policies, are there gaps in those implementation guidelines that allow the company to take advantage of or even shape? And then in terms of the people that the company will have to deal with, which of the implementers can be made into heroes by helping them solve the problem of how to implement the 5-year plan within their local jurisdiction or agency? Or if one wants to do something outside of the plan, which of the decision makers can approve special projects and which of the future leaders, maybe not in the top 25, but in that central committee, the 376, from which the generations of future Chinese leaders will be drawn. So who has the power? How will they wield it? We also need to think about proving a company's worth to China. Does the foreign invested enterprise, FIE, bring something to China that Chinese companies cannot? Do those attributes contribute to the party's priorities? Can the company do good business by contributing? I've already mentioned that. But the second part of this is proving to Chinese leaders the positive economic impact that a foreign company can bring to China due to its investment, due to its production, sourcing, sales, distribution, through its impact on supply chains and consumer spending, through its impact on technology and managerial transfers, through its impact on CSR initiatives that may add to social and general well-being. And then for either of these, getting that information into the right hands, being able to map who in the political and the party hierarchy has the relevant portfolios that you need to deal with, and which other stakeholders may be of interest. And I say here, this is specialized stuff, right? This is the sort of stuff that people with a couple of decades of working in China do. This is something that some of my associates and I do for some of our clients. And here's just an example on economic impact. P&G, well-known company. Its publicly available information said that it had invested $2.5 billion in China through 2014. Its China sales, you could reverse engineer from corporate reports, were about 5.5 billion. You could reverse engineer from AC Nielsen point of sales data that the retailer distributor markup on P&G products was about 4.5 billion, and P&G employed about 10,000 people. And that's what was publicly available on P&G's contribution to China, other than it made investments in schools and public health and other CSR things, until we started looking at it. And what we were able to determine is that if you took P&G, its production, its sourcing, the distribution channels, the employees of all of those entities, and the impact of their consumer spending, that the entire system that P&G was driving in China added 11.4 billion US dollars to China's GDP in 2014 and supported 612,000 employees, right? And these are the sorts of numbers in terms of impact that get the attention at senior levels in China. So what's the upshot? The 14th five-year plan, it's one in a series of documents used to manage the country. It's distinctive and it's important. It closes one chapter, it opens another. It has the longer-term objectives for China's emergence. And one can work with and even benefit from the plan if you understand the party, the power, the plans, the policies, and the people. And with that, I'll close my prepared remarks. I'll remind everyone of the May 12th session. I will thank you. If anyone needs to ask questions after we're done with this session, feel free to email. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Q&A.
Michael, if you want to start with the first set of questions. They have to do with whether the export-driven growth is likely to slow. Is that a corollary of the fact of the double circulation policy?
Yes, actually, China doesn't necessarily project that its exports will slow, but that the exports they're not secure in some senses, or at least some of the exports aren't secure. And that therefore exports is not as reliable a growth engine as that has been the case in the past. So therefore domestic consumption not only creates more import substitution, but it also is a more sustainable, in China's view, mechanism of leveraging growth, while at the same time, presumably helping development and standards of living in China. If we look again, I'll pick up from the chat, external challenges. This 5-year plan actually explicitly identifies external challenges, such as the potential for further global pandemic, the potential for further global trade issues. And in fact, the external challenges are, in a sense, the response to them is baked into this plan. So it's not that any foreign nation is going to be able to prevent China from implementing this plan. It's more a matter of, will other governments respond in other ways, either by, in some cases, perhaps restricting exports, in some cases, banning products from some companies. Also, in some countries, there's a political upswell for governments that historically did not dramatically financially support industrial development to do so. So there are a number of responses that we expect to come from this. There's a question about energy policy. Is that a net zero? Is the net zero a real aim? It's a statement. And China claims to be on target to hit its 2030, I believe, targets under the Paris and Tokyo Accords. But as I said before, energy policy is interesting in China because it's part environmental, it's part national security, and China continues to add energy in ways that increase its emissions. The efficiency in terms of energy utilization per renminbi of GDP, that's increasing, but it is not nearly what some more advanced economies would have. In terms of standard of living, it's very interesting. When the document becomes available in English, I suggest the questioner read it in detail. There's a lot that goes on that talks about improving incomes, improving health, improving social services, including social security benefits. However, on issues of speech, for example, the plan is quite specific on upholding the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party and the unity of thought coming out of the Chinese Communist Party. On dual circulation, it's not giving up on internationalization. It's a different form of internationalization. It's selective internationalization. Chinese companies continue to go international, but they're more careful about the impact on destination countries. And as I showed in one of our earlier sessions, I think the one on China's major economic initiatives, China's outbound investment and outbound international activity has really been shifted in emphasis to the Belt and Road Initiative countries. So it's not giving up on internationalization, it's just a different internationalization. China-EU investment agreement, European sources are telling me it took 7 years to negotiate that agreement. It may take 7 more years to make progress given the current diplomatic situation. formally shaping, there's a question, sorry, if you're hearing answers and you're not seeing the questions, although the chat's there for everyone. International institutions as a whole, and also international standard setting body, is part of the plan. It's, again, I'd have to go back through the details to see which specific organizations have been named, but certainly the Shanghai Club, which was mentioned in the question, the Asian Development Bank is increasingly shifting, but it's the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank that China really has much more sway over. So China continues to work within international organizations, in part pressing its interests, in part pressing the interests of other countries that it believes have not been fairly treated in terms of decision-making in international organizations. That is certainly part of the ongoing plan. There's a question about cryptocurrency efforts by China. Will the Western world use Chinese cryptocurrency? That's a really interesting question from someone who probably knows more about it than I do. I view China's cryptocurrency, and again, the further development of electronic currency is part of this 5-year plan. It certainly is there. And China is experimenting with use of a cryptocurrency, and potentially that could become a major player for international transactions, particularly involving Chinese trade. Most of renminbi settlement that's going on now is specifically China outside China trade, and the renminbi as a currency, I believe, is only involved in something like 6% of international settlements or currency transactions. So it's not at this point a major international currency. Whether or not the crypto version will become more widespread in use, I'm not sure, because until China's currency of either physical or electronic form is freely convertible, it significantly hinders its ability to be useful. And China, again, 15 years ago, people said China's currency will be convertible in 5 years. 10 years ago, they said 5 years. 5 years ago, they stopped even talking about it. So I don't see full convertibility, because the trade-off between convertibility is convertibility versus control. And this administration in China has shown that it tends to come down on the side of control rather than the side of non-control. Again, another question about international institutions. China is both working within existing institutions where it can and to the extent it can. And I think in some ways it favors doing so, because it realizes that there are some obstacles or barriers to some important nations participating if China is seen as the founder, which is an issue with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. But for example, the RCEP, the trade agreement that's been signed, which is basically China, Japan, Korea, ASEAN, excludes the US. The US has chosen not to be part of it, excludes India, at least for the time being, is something that China joined into. And it joined into willingly, wanting to create a bloc where it wasn't necessarily itself setting the rules directly, but was collaborating with ASEAN, Japan, and Korea in building a larger trade bloc, which would be inclusive for China rather than exclusive for China. Again, some other questions. I'll go until Ravi tells me we've run out of time. There's
about 5 minutes, Michael.
Environmental services do I think would most benefit from the given 5-year plan? Basically, a first answer is all of them, in that the movement towards improving the environment in China and environmental efficiency in China is real. And that's one area where if foreign companies have know-how, technologies that are superior to those of Chinese companies, it is an area in which the door tends to be wide open. So the hope or the plan to improve the environment is cross-cutting. And then there's a question, do I think the resurgence of centralized control will be a sign of a wave of destroying private ownership? Do I think state-owned enterprises will play an even more important role in the plan? The plan specifically highlights the importance of state-owned enterprises, and it highlights the leadership role in the commanding heights of the economy for state-owned enterprises. So state-owned enterprises will be supported, they will be financed if necessary. They are placed in the position of being the implementors of party and government planning in key sectors of the economy. Having said that, what China is trying to do is support the state sector without quashing the private sector. And, for example, Alibaba was never in a 5-year plan. Tencent was never in a 5-year plan. DJI, the world leader in small drones, was never in a 5-year plan. So what China is trying to do is develop the mechanisms to direct the overall economy, to keep the commanding heights firmly in the hands of state enterprises, to support private sector Chinese companies to compete against each other, to develop other parts of the economy, to leverage private sector development both for the economy and for joint civilian military development, and where China needs them, to be more open to foreign companies, foreign enterprises, foreign investment. So it's not a matter of more centralized means more closed. It's not even a matter of being more restrictive on the pronouncements that are interpreted as political by domestic and foreign companies. It's not a matter of cracking down on those necessarily means closing down aspects of the private sector. China is trying to manage the combination, and so far it's been in many ways remarkably successful in doing so. And I think with that, given that we've reached virtually our witching hour, maybe I will hand it back to Ravi.
Thank you, Michael. This is the last of the 4 lectures that Michael was going to lead. And I think across the 4 sessions, we've learned an awful lot about China. If there was a way, we would all give you a nice round of applause at this point. But in a manner of speaking, we are doing so. So Michael, thank you so much for your sharing all of this very deep insight accumulated over so many years in that part of the world. I can see the applause signs and the thumbs up signs going up. Let me remind our audience that we have the next in the series coming up on May the 12th, when our lead speaker will be Professor David Sherman, and his topic will be the challenge for Chinese companies going public in the US. So we look forward to seeing all of you at that session. Again, Michael, thank you. Thank you to the audience, and thank you to Magda and the others who helped put this webinar together. Good night. Bye-bye.